A very good morning, everyone. My name is Prem Maheshwaran. I'm a product specialist of ServiceDesk Plus. In this webinar today, we are going to discuss about Request Lifecycle, a new feature that has been added to the cloud version of ServiceDesk Plus. All right, let us take a standard new asset request. Let us analyze Request Lifecycle and how it can influence your current process, with a common request like a new asset request. So generally what we think happens, we open a request, or a request is submitted to us, and then we process the request, meaning we change the request status from open to in progress so that we can complete the work order or all the essentials that has to be given in order to complete the work order. And then finally we close the request. So this is a very straightforward run. And that is what we expect or we think happens with a standard new asset request. But in reality, a lot of things can branch out because a new asset request involves cost. So we may have to get it approved. We may have to check if it is available in store. If it is not available in store, we may have to place an order with our vendor. We have to collect it and then provision it to the end user by applying all the software that he needs on this machine. A lot of statuses can be added into this standard workflow. All right. And finally, there are also options of this request getting canceled or being rejected by the approver. Let us consider a few scenarios where the standard straightforward request can take a deviation. The first situation, a request getting canceled. The original requester cancels the request. The second situation, his manager or the level 1 approver rejects the request. So that is the second situation. All right. The third situation, everything goes smooth and we already have an asset in store. So we are going to provide an existing asset to the end user. And finally, the last situation, we don't have the asset in store. Everything went smooth, but we don't have the asset in store. In that case, I may have to order the asset to my vendor, with my vendor, collect it, and then provide it to the end user. All right. The first situation, the request is canceled. So a requester submits the request, and then later he decides to take it back. So he cancels the request. All right. So in that case, we skip all the other statuses. There is no need for a technician to see other statuses. So it can go from open to the cancel state. The second situation, the flow of the request will look like this. A request is submitted, it's in the open state. So we send it for approval to his manager, the requester's manager, and the approval gets rejected. So in that case, directly from approval, it can go ahead to the rejected state. All right, that's the final state, and the request can be terminated. And no other statuses should be shown to the technician. So provisioning an existing asset. So this is how the flow of the request will look like if you are going to provide an existing asset. So the request arrives to help desk. It's in the open state. Now it is sent for approval. So the approving manager can approve it. Once approved, the request is going to be assigned to a technician. Once assigned, the technician will move the request to in progress state while he's doing the work to deliver the asset. All right. And in that process, he may have to check the availability of the asset in store. He may have contact the asset manager. He'll check if the asset is already available in the store. And once it's there, he can install all the software that's required for the user and provision the asset to the end user and close the request. So pretty much everything goes smooth when you have the asset in store. But what if you don't have the asset in store? That is where from the in progress state, the technician may have to take a deviation. He checks the availability of the asset in store. Once he finds that it's not available in store, he may have to raise the purchase order. Right. So once he raises the purchase order, he processes it. He receives the item from the vendor, provisions the asset, and finally successfully closes the request. All right. Now that we have seen different paths a request can take based on the availability, based on rejection, based on cancellation, let us dig it a little deeper and try answering what next for each request. All right, so let us break it down. Let us elementally analyze how a request is going to progress, based on the situation. Now, when a request is submitted to IT, we have got three options. The technician has three options. All right, so he can directly check for availability. He can directly move the request to get approval, or he can place it in progress state. But ideally, it has to be sent for approval. Technician should not take the other two paths. Instead, he has to choose to send it for approval, and that is where we follow the process and policies. All right, so we have to initiate approval, or we have to guide the technician to initiate approval instead of directly checking the availability of the asset, or directly placing the request in progress. All right, once the approval is received, once again technician is given multiple choices. All right, he can choose to go to any status. He can assign the request directly to himself, or he can move the request to in progress state, or he can directly even go to check the availability of the asset. But the right path is to assign the request to the technician. Or if it is done by a coordinator, he can assign the request to the technician once the approval is received. All right, now after assigning the request, he can begin the work by placing the request in progress state. And from the in progress state, once again, confusion comes in. The technician is once again presented with multiple options. He can directly go check the availability of the asset, or should I raise a purchase order? Right? So when there are too many status options available, technicians can get confused. All right, so we may have to guide the technician to check the availability first, and if it is not there, then he can go ahead and raise a new purchase order. All right, so that is how it has to be guided. Now the technician has to be guided correctly. He can check the availability. Once it is not there, then he can raise a purchase order, provision the asset once it is received, and then close the request. So what really goes into managing a request? So let us see some of the challenges that are there in the way of processing a new asset request, or pretty much any service request. First things, that can be several paths. So depending on the situation, depending on the availability, there can be several paths. And there should be a need to restrict access. Not all technicians can place a request in a status. For example, raising a purchase order, not a level 1 engineer should do it. All right, so a level 1 engineer can check for the availability of the asset, and if it is not there, he may have to collaborate with his supervisor or his manager to raise a new purchase order. If you give the privilege to a level 1 engineer, you might end up raising unnecessary purchase orders. So we have to restrict access for status movements. All right, because at times when you place the request to raise a purchase order, it might trigger some background automation, runbook automations to raise a purchase order automatically. So we don't want that to happen. We want it to be guided, and we want it to be restricted only to certain technicians. Third challenge is asymmetrical information requirement. Currently, we collect maximum information with the use of request templates. So when a user wants to submit a request, he has to fill in the entire form. He has to provide all the required details. But at times, we may have to collect that information during the course of processing the request, right? So we may have to collect data at various points. As of now, until now, we did not have that option, to collect information when the request is placed on hold, to collect information when the request was placed in progress status. So that is what we mean by asymmetrical information collection, collecting data at various points whenever there is a status change. And contextual notification. This is one more important challenge. All right, we have notification rules that triggers notification during the various actions that we perform in the request. But do we also need to trigger notifications whenever there is a status change? Right? When a request is rejected, we have to trigger a notification with a custom message, collecting information from the request and send it across to my original requester. That is contextual notification. It's not a generic notification that we trigger just saying that the request got rejected. Instead, we contextually alert. All right. When the request is placed on hold, now I can contextually alert my end user. And finally, guiding the technician. So assume that you have got a newbie You have educated him about the process that you follow for processing a new asset request. However, when he starts working on it, when he's presented with too many status options, there can be errors. But what if the tool guides him to do it in the proper way? From the open status, a new hire can only place the request to get approval. Once the approval is received, he can only change the status to assigned. Once the request is assigned, the technician can only move the request to in progress status. No other statuses will be presented to the technician. So Service Desk Plus has been static up until now. So until now, we did not have request lifecycle, and it has been a static process. All right. So we tried fitting everything into one size. So that is a mistake in our part as well. So we rectified it now, but let us take a look at request can take any path to completion in no determined sequence. So that was what we had previously. So all or nothing access control on tickets. So a technician can have complete control on a request. He can do pretty much anything that he wants to do in the request, or otherwise nothing is given to him. So with the roles, that is what we were able to achieve. So we were not able to provide certain privileges to technician where he can only change status. All information collected at one point before the ticket submission. So we presented just one form, asked the requester to fill all the information at once before he submits the request, and we collected all the information at one point. So that is a problem as well. So standard notification template being sent out for all types of tickets. So notification rules, you check it. So whenever there is an action, it triggered a notification, but we were not able to trigger contextual notification. And too many choices available to technician, leading to too many mistakes. So when I'm given all the statuses from open, I can choose to cancel the request. I can choose to move the status to rejected. I can choose to close the request, move to in progress. Whatever I want to do, I can do. Was what available, in the previous versions. So let me introduce you to request lifecycle in Service Desk Plus. So request lifecycle is going to rectify all these problems and meet all the challenges. So we can now create a guided path. We can now guide the technician to take the right status. We can also collect contextual information, and notifications can be triggered. So all that we saw in the previous slides are rectified with this one particular feature. All right. So let us see what is new with request lifecycle. So we know that we can move a request from one status to another, open to on hold, assigned to in progress. But while doing that, we have now introduced something called transition in between the statuses. So when a ticket is moved from status 1 to status 2, I can set up the behavior or characteristics of that movement. All right, transition is nothing but the characteristic of a path from one status to another. So when I move the request from open to on hold, what should happen in the back end is what we call as transition. So let us take a look at 3 actions that we can build inside transitions, or give to transitions. So in transition, before the transition, we can restrict role based on a criteria, meaning on hold is a status which is given only to certain technician. A level 1 engineer can never place the request on hold. So such restrictions can be applied before the transition, configured as a before characteristic in a transition. During the transition, when I move the request from open to on hold, what should happen? So we can set certain fields as mandatory. All right. So if you want to collect information, we can set it as mandatory. Now we are collecting information during status changes, not during the beginning of the request. Instead, during the status stage, we are collecting information. So that is, asymmetrical data collection. All right. And also there is an option to negate on hold. For example, your CEO has submitted a request. One of your VIP members have submitted a request. In that case, I don't want my level 1 engineer to place the request on hold. So now I can do a conditional check. I can check whether the user is a VIP user. If he is a VIP user, I can negate the operation of moving the request from open to on hold. That is process, I would say operation abort. All right. So I can even throw a message stating that the requester is a VIP user. You are not allowed to place the request on hold. And finally, after transition. So once the request is moved from status 1 to status 2, now I am given a lot of other options as well. I can run a custom script. I can trigger notification. So once the request is moved on hold status, I can notify my end user stating that the request is placed on hold for this reason. So these are the three different actions available within a transition. All right, let us build one. Let us see what happens when you create a request lifecycle, for which I'm going to take you into the cloud version of ServiceDesk Plus. So this is an ESM enabled version, enterprise service management enabled version. That is why you see a lot of other service desk instances. So with ESM, you can extend the ITSM principles to non-IT departments as well. All right, let me go into the IT help desk instance, and this is an enterprise edition. So request lifecycle is available across all the editions of ServiceDesk Plus, so you don't have to worry about it. Go to the setup page, and in the setup page under automation, you will find a new edition called request lifecycles. Right, so that is where you go to build a request lifecycle. So for this demonstration, I'm going to show you an existing request lifecycle, and how it can guide a process. All right. So once you click on it, a map will be generated, and it will show the process that I have built for a particular request. All right. So from the beginning, let us take a look at the request lifecycle from the beginning. Start of the request, it goes to open state. So when a request is opened, even at that point, I can create a transition. So all the rectangles here denote statuses. All the custom statuses that you created will be available in the right side pane here. You can just drag and drop it if it is required. So if you want to remove it, all you have to do is do a right click on the status and then click until it will be moved once again back into the navigation pane. All right. So I'm sorry, the right side pane. So now the parallelograms that you see here are called transitions. So from between two statuses, now a transition is available. So when I click on the transition, I'm presented with three actions. I would say actions that can be triggered in three events. The first event is before, right? Here I told about restricting access. So only certain technicians should be given the privilege to initiate approval. If that is the case, I can scope it here. So I can choose org roles, all right? And then, reporting manager of technician will be the technician who can do that action, right? So this is the first step that you can do. And also I can apply a criteria. I want that to happen only for VIP users. And if there is a case, I can choose VIP is yes. So if the original requester is a VIP user, only the reporting manager of technician can initiate approval, or I can even remove the approval. So it's as per my requirements, I can do that. All right. So during the transition, when I move the request from open to approval pending statuses, I want to collect information such as, the urgency, probably information that I need, to collect to process a request. All right, let me choose one. Yeah, priority or something like that. So all that information that I want to collect, or if you have a custom field that you have created to capture maximum information before a request can be approved, probably the reason for raising a new asset request. If you want to validate the reason, you can collect that information and then put it in and then send it across to the managers for approval. And after the transition, once it is done, so once again, this is also conditional. I can even create a rule set here, based on a condition, and I can set up update field value, which means I can even automatically fill that field value. And finally, after the transition, after the movement of a request from open to approval pending status, I am given once again a rule creation option where I can set up a condition or apply no condition, which means it applies for everything. And I'm presented with 4 options. One is to send notification. When I click on that, I am given notification templates. I can edit it, all right, and choose who should be notified and what format of notification has to be triggered. It can either be an email or an SMS if you have configured the SMS gateway. Subject can be configured, and also the content message can also be configured. And the best part is once I type in dollar, I'm presented with values from the request. All right, I can put in the subject or the description or a certain field value that can be sent via notification to the right users. And yeah, so this is a contextual notification that can be triggered to the requested technician and even other users. So if you want to create a new notification besides the existing notification template, I can click on new notification and create one from the scratch. I can name the notification. So I want to tell the end user that the new asset request is approved, and it's going to be via email, and it is to the requester. Subject is your new asset request is approved by your manager, something like that. You can provide the message and then save it as a notification, and I can make use of this notification template to be triggered during the status change. So in addition to sending a notification, I can also run a custom function. So most of you know about custom function. It is a scripting in a section with which you can perform API actions in the application. So I can click on run custom functions. Probably if I want to update a purchase order, when I find that no asset is available in store and I want to create a purchase order inside ServiceDesk Plus, so I can do it automatically. All right. So to do that, you may have to get in touch with a developer to do this. All right. So if you have an in-house developer, you can ask them to create a script to create a purchase order within the system. Otherwise, you can always get in touch with our support and we'll be glad to help you on that. All right, so that is custom functions. So adding a task. So once the request is approved, once the request is in progress status, I can even delegate tasks. So installing software is one of the tasks. I can choose and trigger it, after the status change. And finally, you can also trigger a webhook, meaning if you have a third-party application that has to be notified, or a notification has to be sent there, or a ticket has to be submitted there as well. So in case of in application issues, if you want to report a bug in Jira, I can call the webhook. I can use one of the API methods to push the information, push the parameters to the third-party application. So that is what webhook does for you. So you've got 4 options to do. So one is to trigger a notification, run a custom function, add a task, or trigger a webhook. All right, so this is what transition and statuses can do for you. So once it is done, all right, in the details section, I can associate this new workflow that I have created, the cycle request lifecycle that I have created, to certain templates. So one workflow for multiple templates is also possible. So if you want to do the same workflow for your new joining or employee onboarding, whatever it is, or requesting a CRM account, all right, all these are service request. So I want this one life cycle to be applied for all my service requests, and I can associate it to multiple templates, and the same workflow, same life cycle will be followed by all these requests. All right. So you've got 2 views for the request lifecycle. One is the map view, that is what we see here. It's a graphical workflow builder, and you also have got a linear view. All right, in the linear view, I can take a look at the different options available by expanding and collapsing the rule set. Right, once again, let us go back to the map view. All right, and there is an option to export this map as a PDF file. All right. So if you want to create knowledge base articles for your process education, you can export this workflow as a PDF and give it across to your new hires, your level 1 engineers. They can take a look at the graphical workflow and learn from it. All right. So there is also a history option with which you can see all the changes made to the life cycle. And also, if you want to learn more details about this life cycle, you can take a look at more details. All right, let us do this. Let me close the existing one and I'll show you how you can create a new life cycle. To do that, click on new life cycle. You can provide a name for it. I'm going to say mobile phones requests. Right. So when I go to create a new lifecycle, I can associate templates directly here from as well. Right. When I click on next, I'll be presented with a canvas, right? An empty page from where I can start building my request. So the first status, so all the statuses that I have created, all the statuses that is available in my system will be available here. So I can drag and drop. So the first status is going to be open. As I drag and drop, now I get the start open, and I can even create a transition here. All right, so now I have named this transition. When I click on it, I'll be given during and after. The first transition, which exists before open, you don't have an option to set the before event. So you'll be given during and after. So now let me drag and drop the next status. It's going to be in progress. Right now, there is no connection between open and in progress. So what I have to do is I can drag and drop as many statuses I want in this workflow, and then I can choose the flow or create the flow. So from open, a technician can move only to in progress status. So when he is in the open state, he can only go to in progress status. And from in progress status, he has got only one option, which is to place the request on hold. At times, he doesn't have to place the request on hold. So I'm going to give him the second option to close the request. So from in progress, when I click on it, he has got two options, either to place the request on hold until he collects information or to close the request. All right. So that is how we create a guided path to our technician. All right. So we give him two possible actions. When I hover the mouse over the status, you see the lines going in red color. So that states the possible transition, the possible status changes that can be done. To set up the behavior that has to happen, so I can click on the transition, provide the name, place on hold. So do that. I can create the characteristics by going into before, during, and after transition. Right? Once you construct the flow, once you create the life cycle, then you can save it as draft momentarily until you make further changes, or otherwise you can publish this to the template that you have associated. All right. In my case, request an iPhone is a template, and I'm going to associate this life cycle to that template. Right. So that is how you create a new request life cycle. So let me go back into the request section and show you how this request lifecycle is going to reflect in a request. All right, let me do this. Yeah, if you take a look at this request, the status of the request is in approval pending status. All right, so once the approval is given, let me go into the approval section, and I think I have got, right? So the next transition, the next possible status change is shown as assign technician. All right. When I click on it, a technician can be assigned. I'm going to say Ashwin and update. To do that, the status will be changed. If you take a look at it, I did not have any other option. I cannot move the request to closed status directly from here. So no option to edit the status. The only thing that I can do in this request is follow the transition. So the application guides me to do, the tool guides me to do what I should do next. So I can go begin the work and move the request to in progress status. All right. When I click on begin the work, the transition is executed successfully. So now the status is in progress. All right. Now, once again, I'm given two options now. So at times I am presented with two options. One is provision the existing asset or purchase a new asset. So this is where I'm going to check with my asset manager about the assets in store. If I have the asset in store, I can click on provision an existing asset and close the request. Or otherwise, I may have to raise a purchase order. Right. I'm going to say provision an existing asset. I can provide the asset ID that I'm going to give him. All right, and then click on update. So this is contextual information that I have gathered. So when I say I'm going to provision the asset, I am also asked to provide the asset ID. Only after providing the asset ID, I can move the request from in progress status to asset provision status. All right. The next possible status is asset is provisioned, and I can close the request. So I'm going to say click on asset is provisioned. All right. I can say whether it's a first call resolution. All right. As the requester acknowledge the resolution, if I've got a go ahead over the phone call, I can say yes. Asset is provided to the end user. If you're using closure code for internal reference, I can say success. All right, successfully provided. Right, and then click on update. Once I do that, all the necessary information is filled and the request is successfully closed with first call resolution in place. So here are 6 ways you can use request lifecycles to enhance your existing process, service delivery process. First one, to guide the technician at every step. So you're going to show the technician the next possible transition. All right. So technicians are guided in the right path. Second, to restrict access to a group or individual. So transitions or statuses will be shown only to certain technicians. You can restrict it to show only to certain technicians. Okay. To request information only when it is required. As you saw, when I when I said I'm going to provide an existing asset, it asked me the asset ID, which is a custom field that I have built, and I have mandated it for the status change. So that way I collect information only when it is required, because at the beginning of the request, I don't know what asset ID I'm going to give to the end user. So only after I check the availability of the asset in store, I can provide the asset ID. I can fill in the asset ID and provide the asset to the end user. So we make information collection only at the points when it is required. All right. To provide contextual notification. Once again, after the completion of the status change, we may have to notify the stakeholders and anyone who plays a part in the request, like the requester, the approver, the asset manager, or anyone who wants to be as a part of the request has to be notified. So that is why we have our roles, organizational roles available there for notification to whom we can trigger contextual notifications. All right. To abort ticket processing if needed. So if VIP user is true, then my request should not be placed on hold. So I have to abort that action. So we have a negate option available in the request lifecycle. So when a requester tries to place the request on hold, the action will be aborted and the request will go back to the open status. And finally, to invoke custom scripts. So you've got an option to invoke custom functions. You've got an option to invoke webhooks. So with custom functions, you can perform API operations within ServiceDesk Plus, and using webhooks, you can perform operations, API calls to third-party applications. All right. Now, all of us can make a request follow several paths to completion. You don't have to create different templates for processing the same request in different ways. Instead, there can be just one template and different paths depending on the criteria and situation. Restrict access at different points. So at different status change points, I can restrict access to only certain technicians. Provide asymmetrical information. So collect data information at various points, data collection at various points. Send out contextual notification at different points of request fulfillment. And also guide technicians one step at a time. So that dramatically reduces the time required for training your technician in the processes that they have to follow. So you guide the technician one step at a time dynamically. So thank you all. So if you've got any further questions, please feel free to send it across to support@servicedeskplusondemand.com. We'll answer the most for you. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.